Alright, so as voted on by the channel members and the patrons, this week I'm giving you my spoiler review of The Acolyte, the latest Star Wars series from Disney+. Now, I didn't start out watching the series from the moment it premiered because, honestly, given all of the rumors and speculation regarding this show leading up to its release, I wasn't super excited for it. I thought it was going to be a train wreck, in all honesty, so I ended up binge watching it after this first season was over, all 8 episodes, although I did get through the first 3 episodes first, and then I went back to watch the other 5 a few days later, and you'll see why. I'm going to tell you what I didn't like about the show, what I actually did like about it, and honestly what ended up surprising me in the end. And once again, from this point forward, we are delving into spoiler territory. Episode 1 starts out pretty strong with an epic duel between an assassin and a Jedi Master named Indara, and right off the bat, this was the first huge surprise for me, which is the lightsaber combat. I'm not gonna lie, the lightsaber combat in this show is some of the best that not only Disney has given us, but Star Wars in general has given us. There are a lot of cool techniques, a lot of cool strategies, some unorthodox strategies that are employed in every fight, and these are some of the most brutal and violent battles I think we've ever seen on screen from Star Wars. I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised because, I don't know, like it felt exciting and it felt fun, and again, it was very brutal, and I don't know what that says about me, but again, it was just like I really enjoyed the combat. I was like, these fights are pretty damn cool. Like, you really feel the fights, every impact. It was pretty cool, and I was surprised by that. So right off the bat, we're starting off pretty strong here. So in this scene, Master Indara is taken out by the assassin, and there is a maintenance worker on a Trade Federation ship that is accused of the murder. Her name is Osha, and she does match the description of the assassin. So she's taken into custody on a prisoner ship, and the other prisoners escape via escape pods, causing her to be left to die on the ship and crash on an ice planet. Not Hoth, but another ice world. And this is where we get the second big surprise for me, which is the environments, the settings, the backdrops that we see throughout this show. They're all freaking beautiful. They're stunning. Honest to God, this show through most of its run looks and feels like a movie. Yes, it's a show, but it has the look of a Star Wars film. It's very cinematic, and that I thought was pretty damn impressive. I really did. Back at the Jedi Temple, we find out that Osha was a Jedi Padawan, and her former master, Master Soul, is sent to find and apprehend her, taking 2 other Jedi alongside him, that being a young girl, a child named Jeki, and a young man named Yord. And these 4, along with Osha, are going to be our main crew for most of the season. And they're a pretty good crew. They're a pretty good cast of characters. I like these characters. I think they have great chemistry together, these actors, and honestly, yeah, it was a really good cast to follow. It was really, really fun, which kind of makes what happens later a bit disappointing, in all honesty, but I did like all of these characters. Like, out of the main cast, there really wasn't anybody that, you know, as far as like the main 4 Jedi, that I really didn't dislike. You know, I really did appreciate this cast, and, you know, I got invested in them. So they end up finding Osha, and it's revealed that Osha has a twin sister named May, who is supposed to have died years ago when they were kids, but she survived, and she's actually the one responsible for killing Master Indara, which I'm glad they went this route and made this revelation early in the first episode, because to me, it was obvious right from the start that Osha didn't do this. And given the assassin looks just like her, the only logical answer was that the assassin was either Osha's twin or a clone, and they could have dragged out this mystery for a few episodes, but they didn't. They gave us the reveal from the start, and I think that allowed for a more interesting plot. Right from the start, you can tell that there's something special about Osha and May, and when we get to the twist about these twins, I'll talk about when we get to episode 3. But yeah, like you could tell that Osha, she didn't do these murders because she's obviously enthralled with the Jedi Order. Even though she's a former Jedi, she still believes in their code and their ethics, and it was pretty obvious from the beginning that, yeah, Osha didn't do this. So I'm just really glad they didn't drag this out and make it some mystery like, oh, is she actually the killer? Is she not the killer? Like, that would have been very boring. And I think because they went ahead and revealed that in the first episode, we honestly ended up getting a much more interesting plot. So in episode 2, May is hunting another Jedi Master, Master Torben, and we learn that there are 2 other Jedi Masters besides Torben on her kill list, including Master Soul, and we find out in episode 3 why she's after these 4 particular masters. But when she tries to assassinate Torben, she fails miserably. She can't even touch him. She continues to be repelled by the Force and ultimately has to retreat. And as a result, she ends up meeting up with this shady guy going by the alias of Quamir, who gives a poison for May to use on Torben, and they also speak about a he that they are working for, and we'll get to that in a few episodes. But in the meantime, Sol, Osha, Yord, and Jeki track down May, but it's too late to stop her from killing Torben, and to be honest, she doesn't even kill him. He takes himself out. He willingly chooses to drink the poison, a poison made from ingredients of May and Osha's home planet, and he does so out of some sense of guilt. Apparently something horrible happened between these 4 Jedi and the twins when they were kids, which again we'll talk about in episode 3. But Osha, she pretends to be May in order to interrogate Quamir, and he recognizes the ruse pretty quickly, but not before he reveals that they are working for a mysterious he, whoever he is. And Sol and his party give chase to Osha and Quamir, but they escape. And I'm gonna keep it real. These first 2 episodes are really, really good. Visually, from a writing standpoint, the characters, the chemistry, the combat, all of it is really top notch. I mean, I really, really was having fun with both of these episodes. And I was beginning to wonder, okay, what's the problem here? Why do people have an issue with this show? Well, the problems start to show up in a big way in episode 3. Episode 3 is a flashback episode where we get the backstory, the tragedy that has been hinted at up to this point. And okay, this is where I started to understand why people had such a big problem with this story. So we learn that Osha and May are children living in a coven of Force witches, not the Night Sisters of Dathomir, but another group of witches. And I know that some people thought this was redundant, but I don't really have an issue with this. The galaxy is huge, and there are many Force religions outside of just the Jedi, the Sith, and the Night Sisters. And even though, yes, the Jedi and the Sith are the most influential of the Force religions, there being another group of Force witches outside of Dathomir, yeah, that doesn't really surprise me, because you have to understand just how large and vast and diverse the galaxy really is. I mean, it makes sense that there would be another group of witches that aren't associated with Dathomir. Like, again, like there's so many different religions on Earth. Like, I don't know why this would surprise people that you would have an even greater diversity in the galaxy. Like, what? So yeah, like that didn't really bother me. Now, even though that doesn't bother me, this does. What doesn't make sense, and what honestly I feel does really break the lore of the story, is the origin of Osha and May, where we learn that 2 of the witches, the leaders of this coven, actually created Osha and May through the Force. Now, this is a major lore-breaking issue, because one of the reasons that Anakin is the chosen one is because he is the one, again, the one created through the Force, without a father being needed. The fact that we now have these twins who were also created through the Force, that's a problem. That takes away immensely from the importance and significance of Anakin Skywalker. And if this plot point holds true, this is bad. I mean, this is really, really bad. And I don't know what it is about Disney, but they seem hell-bent on destroying the whole Chosen One plot point and Anakin's importance in the lore. In Rise of Skywalker, Palpatine and the Sith return, and it isn't Anakin who destroys the Sith and brings balance to the Force, like the prophecy said he would. It's Rey. It's freaking Rey Skywalker. That alone completely ruins the prequel trilogy, where Anakin being the chosen one was central to the story. It takes away heavily from Anakin's sacrifice, and it wasn't like it was necessary. Disney could have easily brought Anakin back as a Force ghost and had him be central in the defeat of Palpatine and the Sith, but they didn't do that. Hell, there have been edits on YouTube where people have put Anakin in the final battle with Palpatine, and it's so much better. Now we find out that Anakin wasn't even the only one conceived through the Force? Okay then, what the hell is the point and purpose of Anakin Skywalker? Why is he so special? Remember, it was George Lucas himself, the man that created this whole franchise. He said that the numbered episodic films are all about Darth Vader, Anakin. It's Anakin's story. Yet he's not essential to the sequels, and now the special circumstances of his creation are no longer special, and I don't get it. Why does Disney have such a hate boner for this character? The central character of Star Wars is Anakin, and yet they take a dump on him all day, every day, and I just don't get it. But that being said, let's move on, because I could complain about this all day. I really could, but we don't have all day, so let's move on. So we learn that Master Sol, Master Indara, Master Torben, and Master Kanaka, a Wookiee Jedi, which is pretty damn cool, find the twins, and they want to test them to see if they could become Jedi. Obviously, the Coven is not very happy about this, but it is Republic law for children to be tested to see if they have the Force. Osha wants to be a Jedi. She's all for it. May, on the other hand, she hates this. She wants to be a witch, and she is pissed that Osha doesn't want the same thing. In fact, violently so, because when Osha is about to leave to become a Jedi, May sets fire to the entire lair of the witches because she would rather Osha die than leave her and become a Jedi. But she only ends up killing the Coven, and obviously May is off her freaking rocker. She is clearly mentally unstable, and she's kind of crazy, man. She's kind of crazy. But anyway, Sol is able to save Osha, but it was presumed that May died. So Osha goes on to become a Jedi, although she later failed and left the Order, and May goes into hiding, joining up with whoever he is. But in episode 4, we return to the present day, and the group track down the location of Master Kelnaka and are trying to rescue him before he gets taken out. But of course, he obviously gets taken out. May, having realized that Osha, her sister, is still alive, intends to betray him, whoever him is, and so she leaves Kamir trapped so he can't interfere and goes off on her own. At this point, she seems to only care about her sister, and ultimately it's not May that kills Kelnaka, it is May's master, the mysterious him, and this leads to a huge battle with the masked Darksider, where I should state that there were other Jedi that came to this world with Sol, Jeki, Yord, and Osha, and they basically just came along to be fodder because they all get taken out by this mysterious him, and we'll see why later. Which moves us into episode 5, but I do want to say before we get to episode 5, Ki-Adi-Mundi makes an appearance in this episode, and okay, here's the thing, this show takes place 100 years before the rise of the Empire. Some have said, well, Mundi shouldn't be here, he shouldn't be alive at this point, but I'm going to be honest with you, that doesn't really bother me, because if they want to change the biology of his species a bit, to say that they have these longer lifespans, fine, that's fine, it's not really that big of an alteration. Is it kind of an unnecessary change? Yes, but it doesn't really affect the story in any meaningful way. It's just species biology. It's another way to get a film cameo into the show. That's really whatever. But the fact that Ki-Adi-Mundi is aware of this whole dark side masked man, some people have questioned, okay, well, what about the line in The Phantom Menace where he says, the Sith have been extinct for over a millennia? Maybe I missed something, and if I did, tell me in the comments of this video, but they don't actually know if this guy is a Sith. From what I remember from watching this episode, no one ever confirms that he is a Sith. Alright? They know that the dark side's involved, but again, I think people forget, just because you use the dark side, it doesn't make you a Sith. You have to adhere to a specific Sith doctrine and have certain goals to be a Sith. Not to mention, at least in Legends, the Sith emerged from the Jedi, whereas other dark side orders have no connection to the Jedi and appeared on their own. I mean, for example, the witches in this show are a dark side order. They're not Sith. They have nothing to do with Sith. The Night Sisters of Dathomir are a dark side order, but they're not Sith. So them being aware that there is a dark side user involved in all of this, that doesn't mean that they're aware that the Sith are back or that the Sith are not extinct, because the Sith are not the dark side and the dark side is not the Sith. The Sith is a very specific dark side order. You get what I'm saying? And a lot of people conflate the two. They think, okay, dark side automatically Sith. No. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. So again, unless I'm missing something, this doesn't necessarily contradict the Phantom Menace stuff, because they don't have confirmation, or at least Mooney and the Jedi we saw in the prequels don't have confirmation that this is a Sith Lord. So I don't think it necessarily screws up the lore. So in episode 5, we continue with the fight, and this honestly, again, the combat in the show is freaking fantastic. And this is some of the most brutal lightsaber dueling we've ever seen on screen. I love the fighting in this show. I can't praise it enough, man. I really can't. The most brutal moment is when the masked him takes out Jackie, a freaking child, bro. They held nothing back here in terms of the brutality. And it's not like they even make an attempt to hide it. She gets stabbed on screen 3 times through the torso. It's brutal. Yord and Osha show up, and the masked him breaks Yord's neck, taking him out. I'm like, damn. And those deaths hurt, because up to this point, I had really grown to like these characters. I thought they were well written and fun to watch. So good writing on making us like these characters, and screw you for making us hurt when they die. Like, damn, like that hurt. However, I will say, Jackie didn't go out without a small victory, without some kind of consolation prize, and that is that she cuts off the mask of the mysterious him, and it's revealed to be none other than Khmer. And not only is it Khmer, but we learned that Khmer is in fact a Sith. Not just a dark side user of some other Force religion, not a precursor to the Knights of Ren like some had speculated, but a straight up Sith. And I was kind of conflicted on this, because the Sith are supposed to be in hiding at this point. And I knew, okay, if they're going to have Khmer be a Sith, then everyone who knows that he's a Sith has to die, because again, in the Phantom Menace, the Jedi believe the Sith are extinct and have been for 1,000 years. Now, Ki-Adi-Mundi and the other Jedi at the temple that are where there's some kind of dark side user involved, they don't, as far as I know, unless I missed something, they don't know that he's a Sith. They just know that he's a dark side user. But the people that are actually on this planet that have actually physically come into contact with Khmer, they now know that he's a Sith. So I was like, okay, everybody here is going to die, or something's going to happen where they cannot contact the Republic or the Jedi, because the Jedi cannot be made aware that the Sith are still running about during this time period. It makes no sense. But that being said, I knew that Khmer was a Sith from the moment he was introduced, because he's literally quoting a line from the Sith Code in episode 2 where he tells May that peace is a lie. That is directly from the Sith Code. So I knew that he was a Sith, going back to his introduction in episode 2. This was not really a huge surprise for me, but that being said, we do get this epic duel between Khmer and Sol, and Osha gets these Umbra Moss, I think they're called, to just go beast mode on this guy. But at the end, Osha is knocked out, and May actually switches places with her. So now, going into the next episode, we have May with Sol and Osha with Khmer. Not much to say on this episode, on episode 6, to be honest, because it's pretty simple. Khmer is pissed that May betrayed him, and so he tries to seduce Osha to the dark side, and he's trying to show her the way of the Sith, and she does seem to be interested to an extent, which we'll talk about this towards the end of the video, but I'll say this, the temptation seemed to be a bit rushed, and given how loyal and faithful she was to the Jedi ideas, even though she was no longer a Jedi, She was very faithful to their ideas and to their code and their ethics, and it just seems weird for her to be tempted by the dark side at all, especially this quickly. On the flip side, May, pretending to be Osha, is trying to assassinate Sol. Pretty obvious there. That's been her motivation the entire show. But he does figure it out pretty quick and begins to explain the truth of what happened that night when their coven was destroyed. Also, he is clearly racked with guilt over what happened with Jackie and Yord. And I gotta be honest with you, man. I gotta be honest with you. Master Sol's kind of my favorite character in this whole show. He's like a very morally gray character, but he has all these really good intentions. It's just, it's kind of like the whole idea of the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I feel for him, man. I really do. But yeah, I think honestly, Master Sol might be my favorite character out of this entire show. I'm not gonna lie. So then we move into episode 7, which is another flashback episode where we are given more context and more insight into what happened when the witches were destroyed. So yeah, May still set the fire and everything. Like, ultimately, she is still responsible for those deaths. But we find out more of what was happening during the fire that Osha didn't see, that she wasn't aware of. The strict mother, because I don't remember their names, but the strict mother basically encourages May to get angry, and then both moms prepare to fight the Jedi, and Sol ends up killing the more chilled mom, even though it was in self-defense. And she was doing this weird black magic mist thing with May, which I don't think they ever really fully explained that. Again, the witch's force magic is not very well defined in this show, and that is another flaw. But regardless, she reveals that she was going to let Osha become a Jedi and keep May, because May didn't want to be a Jedi. She wanted to be a witch, but she was going to let Osha go. And yeah, it was sad to see her die, because you can tell like she really does want the best for these kids. And again, it was in self-defense, but obviously May is pissed that her mom is dead and that the Jedi killed her. And this explains why she went on a killing spree to kill these 4 masters throughout this show. Now the other mom, the stricter mom, she possesses Kalneka. And again, not really explained how or why or the mechanics behind this, but ultimately she is defeated, she is taken care of. And then as the witch's lair is collapsing, we see the bridge scene with Osha and May, and Sol is using the Force to try and hold the bridge up to save them, but he can't, and he has to let one go, and so he lets May go and saves Osha. So it's a gray area here, because yes, Sol made a choice to save one sister over the other, and he did kill the chilled mother, but again, he was put between a rock and a hard place in both situations, and he had to make a choice, which is the title of the episode, Choice. So go figure. I can see why he would feel guilty though, and why May would be angry. But Sol is clearly not a bad guy. He just didn't have any good options. And maybe Master Indara was right. Maybe he should have just left well enough alone, and, you know, he let his attachment to these kids get in the way, and things didn't turn out well in the long run, especially for him, as we're going to see in the next episode. But like I said, yes, Sol is probably my favorite character in this season, because I'm really able to put myself in his shoes, and I don't know what I would do in those situations that he's put in. I don't know what choice I would make, and I would say overall he's a pretty well-written character. Also in this episode, they do straight up talk about how the twins were created by the 2 lead witches using the Force. So I guess Anakin is not the special snowflake we all thought he was, but I already went on that rant. And just keep this in mind though, because I'm going to be bringing this up at the end of the video on how they can fix all of this, and how they can ultimately make everything make sense and line up with the films at the end of this show. Not the end of this season, but the end of this show, assuming that we get a season 2. But that does bring us to episode 8 and the finale of season 1 of The Acolyte, with the episode appropriately titled The Acolyte. Osha sees a vision of May killing Sol, so she and Kamir head off to find her. Now, to begin with, I was like, why is Kamir giving Osha a chance to save her sister? If he's a straight up Sith, shouldn't he be killing Osha so she doesn't get in the way of his plans? But when I think about it, it's pretty obvious that at this point he has given up on May as an acolyte, and instead is trying to turn Osha to the dark side. So it seems like he sees more value in letting her live, and possibly using May to manipulate Osha into joining him, which by the end of the episode, he sort of kind of does. But anyways, as Osha Osha and Khmer leave the planet they are on to go and find May, we see hiding in a cave, watching them depart, is a black-robed Moon. None other than what we can all assume is Darth Plagueis, Palpatine's eventual Sith Master. So, as a major fan of the Darth Plagueis novel and the character of Darth Plagueis himself, I kid you not, I gasped, I smiled, and I got all giddy inside when I saw this, because this is one of my favorite novel exclusive characters finally brought to life on screen for the first time. And even though it was just for a few seconds, seeing Darth Plagueis in live action was a dream come true, I'm not gonna lie. And I just want you guys to keep Plagueis in the back of your mind, because I'm gonna bring him up again at the very end of this video, because if we get a season 2, I'm not gonna lie, Darth Plagueis may be the character that makes or breaks this show overall. Now, moving back over to Coruscant, there has been this Jedi Master that's been involved in the plot in the background. I haven't really talked about her much because she's not had much effect on the story up to this point, besides just being a background character. But she's been the one that Sol has been reporting to on this entire mission. I believe her name was Master Venestra, if I'm not mistaken. And she meets with a senator who is very distrustful of the Jedi and believe that they have too much power, and he straight up foreshadows Anakin Skywalker. He says that he doesn't like the Jedi because they attempt to control emotion, and he believes that one day a Jedi is going to have his emotions spiral out of control and he'll be too powerful for the Order to stop, and it will bring down the Jedi and bring down the Republic. And this obviously comes true 100 years later when Anakin turns to the dark side because of his emotions, because of his attachments, and becomes Darth Vader and ends up almost taking out all of the Jedi and bringing down the Republic and replacing it with the Empire. So this scene could be described as the foreshadowing of Order 66, pretty much. I mean, that's what it is. And I mean, look, he's not wrong, and I know people don't like that this show criticizes the Jedi so much, but let's just be clear, even in the prequels, during this whole time period, the Jedi are extremely egotistical and confident to a fault. They never saw the return of the Sith and the rise of the Empire coming. And that's not something that Disney made up. That's how George Lucas wrote the Jedi Order of this time period to be like. The Jedi here are a flawed order. They have in many regards lost their way, which is why I believe part of the Chosen One's destiny was to put the Jedi back on the right path. I think that is part of what balance in the Force is. But since they refuse to change, since they refuse to reform, they wound up getting destroyed. And in Legends anyways, Luke goes on to rebuild the Jedi Order and also reform it, whereas of course in canon we got the sorry excuse for a character that is, you know, Return of the Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker, which in my opinion is not Luke Skywalker at all. But we're not going to criticize the sequels. We're not going to criticize the sequels. If you guys want to hear me criticize the sequels, I have a video on that talking about which is the worst sequel trilogy film. I'll leave that linked in the description box down below if you guys want to check that out. But yeah, getting back to the episode, calling out the Jedi for their major issues during this time period, I think is fine. It doesn't really bother me because it's true. The Jedi are majorly flawed during this point of galactic history, and that's why Darth Sidious and the Sith were able to rise, and the Republic fell, and the Empire rose from the ashes of the Republic, because the Jedi were not doing what they were supposed to do, and they weren't really acting like Jedi. The only one you could really say was like acting as a true Jedi during this time period would probably be Qui-Gon Jinn, which is why Qui-Gon is my favorite Star Wars character. Anyways, getting back to this episode, Venestra heads with a team of Jedi out to the Witch Planet to find Master Sol, and May escapes from Sol to that same planet. And of course, Osha and Khmer are headed there as well. So we return to the Witch Planet for an epic showdown for the final battle of the season. Sol and Khmer have an awesome duel. Again, I've praised the combat so much in this show, I don't know what else I can say, but I will say more anyways, because Osha learns the truth that Sol killed their mom, and Osha and May have this awesome hand-to-hand fight. Again, the combat in this show is really well done, and ultimately, yes, Sol has to admit the truth to Osha, which sends her over the edge, causing her to force choke Soul to death, which I was pissed about because, again, I think he's the best character in the whole show. But she kills him and bleeds his blue lightsaber crystal to red with a really cool blade effect showing this transition from blue to red. But yeah, Osha is on the dark side now, apparently. And again, I'm not against her turning to the dark side, but given how in love she was with Jedi teachings, this just seemed really rushed. And because it is the last episode of the season, we don't really get a lot of time to breathe to take in this sudden character change. And it gave me a bit of whiplash, to be honest, when I watched it. I feel like if the series was 10 or 12 episodes and we had a couple of more episodes to build up to this and then a couple to really come to terms with it, it would have set better with me. But as it stands, this just, again, it just seemed rushed, really rushed. And while I could be okay with her decision as a character, I really disagree with how this was paced and how this was written. I just felt like this needed more time for this transition to happen. But let's get through this. It's a long video already and we're almost at the end. So Venestra and the Jedi arrive. So Osha, May, and Kamir, they're on the run. Osha agrees to become Kamir's acolyte if May can go free. However, to keep the truth of the Sith hidden, he wipes May's memories. And while Osha and Kamir go back into hiding, May is taken into custody by the Jedi, and she can't remember anything that happened after the destruction of her coven when she was just 8 years old. And she doesn't seem to be able to remember her sister at all. Venestra, for some reason, tries to cover all this up by pinning the blame all on Soul, and she says that he offed himself, basically. And we do see her at the end going to speak to Master Yoda. And the Jedi are just really shady in all of this. And again, I don't have a problem with that because the Jedi are like super flawed in this time period. But I wonder, okay, how much have they taken away from this? Do they suspect that the Sith have returned? Are they going to cover everything up? I don't know. But again, they have to tread carefully because right now Disney is walking a fine line with how much the Jedi knew and when did they know it in regards to the Sith. And if they aren't careful, they could break the lore even worse than they already have. So this is really walking a fine line, Disney. I'm not going to say you went over the line yet, but you have to be really freaking careful at this point. Also, it is implied that Kamir was once the Jedi Padawan to Venestra. But now, again, it's implied that he is the apprentice to Darth Plagueis. And we don't know Kamir's Sith name either, if he is indeed an actual Sith Lord and not just a Sith assassin like Asajj Ventress, for example. But it is implied that he is the apprentice to Darth Plagueis. So that brings us back around to Darth Plagueis, and I want to talk about how I think Plagueis could be the key to fixing a lot of the issues with this show. So in the Darth Plagueis novel and in the Revenge of the Sith movie, we know that Plagueis was heavily involved in experimenting with the midichlorians, which are, of course, the biological microscopic beings that, allow people to connect to the Force, kind of the mediators between the Force and living beings. And so Plagueis was experimenting with the midichlorians and was seeking the key to eternal life through these experiments. It seems to be hinted at in the opera scene from Revenge of the Sith that Plagueis could indeed create life. Now, a lot of people at the time, and even to this day, assume that Darth Plagueis actually used the Force to influence the midichlorians to create Anakin Skywalker. However, this was not actually the case. In the Plagueis novel, it is revealed that Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious performed a ritual in the attempt. Again, I want to say that again and make it very clear. The attempt to create life through the Force, but they failed. Not only did they fail, but the Force struck back. It is described as if in that moment, the Force receded from them. The Force was essentially pissed because the Sith tried to step onto its territory, which is the realm of creation. As a result, the Force itself created, not Plagueis, not Palpatine, the Force itself created Anakin Skywalker to strike back against the Sith. So Anakin was not created by Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious, but rather he was the punishment that the Force itself inflicted onto the Sith for their attempt to create life. In other words, Anakin was not created by Plagueis, but he was created as a consequence, a punishment of what Plagueis tried to do. No one until this show has ever actually created life using the Force. It's always been they create life the old-fashioned way by doing the nasty, or through science such as cloning. And that leads me to the biggest lore-breaking issue of the series, and that is Osha and May supposedly being created through the Force. That's just ridiculous. And again, it breaks the lore surrounding Anakin. So what I propose, and what I think is the best way to fix this, is have it revealed in season 2 that it was in fact Darth Plagueis who created Osha and May. Not through the Force, but through one of his many scientific experiments in an attempt to create life and find eternal life. But he tricked the Witch Mothers into believing they created the twins through the Force. In other words, the witches have been used and misled by Darth Plagueis this entire time. And the series does kind of hint towards this, I think, or at least leaves it open as a possibility, because in the flashbacks, Soul asks how the twins were made, and the witches never really give a straight answer, and you can tell from their body language, they're hiding something. Also in the flashback, they for a long time thought it was impossible for them to have children, to have new young witches to raise, and they call Osha and May a miracle. So what if at some point Darth Plagueis approached the Witch Mothers and said, hey, I can use my science and knowledge of midichlorians to give you children, but in exchange, you must let me observe and watch them from afar so that I can record the results of this experiment. And the witches have been lying to the coven that entire time about how the twins were conceived. In other words, I'm suggesting that more or less Osha and May are test tube babies created by Plagueis as one of his experiments to create life and grant himself immortal life. And I think I'm correct, because before Soul dies, he does seem to suggest that May and Osha are not really sisters, so maybe he knows that they are somehow science experiments, artificial in some way. At least that's the implication that I'm getting from all of this. And if I'm right, and that turns out to be the case, then all of a sudden this is no longer a lore-breaking issue. Actually, this becomes very interesting and a fascinating plot point, because an experiment like that is something that Darth Plagueis would definitely do based on his behavior in the novel, which may suggest, hey, it seems like these writers might understand the character of Darth Plagueis, and I'm really hoping that I'm right, and I really hope they do Plagueis justice, because this is one of my favorite Star Wars characters, and if they screw him up, I'm gonna be just beyond pissed. You can't even imagine. If they screw up Plagueis, yes, Star Wars at that point is officially dead to me. But if they go in the direction that I'm suggesting here, that means this whole Acolyte series could just be a prequel to a Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious series, which would be absolutely amazing for me. I would love that. And while we're on the topic, speaking of Darth Sidious, because this is 100 years before the prequels, Palpatine hasn't even been born yet, so Plagueis having another apprentice at this point, it doesn't really break the rule of two, nor does it really mess up the timeline in any way. It is true that in the Plagueis novel, Plagueis did not have any other apprentice before Palpatine. Now, there were a few candidates that he considered as possible apprentice material, including Count Dooku, but he never actually made any of them his apprentice. Sidious in the book was his first and only true apprentice. Obviously, Quimir being his apprentice is a change from the novel, but it's not a lore-breaking change, because more than likely, in fact, this has to be the case, Quimir is going to die before Plagueis meets Palpatine. He has to. There is no other way for this to make sense. And if that's the case, then Osha being his acolyte, and probably Quimir is using Osha, training her so they can team up and take down Plagueis, would be my assumption. But that means that, yeah, Osha, if Quimir dies, Osha is probably going to have to die as well. Now, at some point, if Quimir and Osha die and Plagueis later makes Palpatine his second and final apprentice, then it all lines up. It will all make sense. Which again is why I think the Acolyte may end up being a prequel to a possible Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious Disney Plus series. And if that's the case, if everything I've suggested here at the end of this video turns out to be true, then this series may not be as bad as everyone thinks, and a lot of people could have egg on their face. But that being said, that's all speculation, and we'll have to wait and see. As it stands right now, the Acolyte Season 1 on its own, putting all of that speculation aside, the Acolyte is a series that has some good characters, some beautiful visuals, but a story that has some glaring issues that could potentially be lore-breaking and ultimately be the death knell in the coffin for Disney's Star Wars. But as I've pointed out, there are definitely ways to turn the ship around in Season 2. There's scenes here in order to make something really, really cool if they play their cards right. And let's just hope that if there is a Season 2, it carries over the writing from episodes 1 to 5. Because towards the end of this season, the writing started to fall off in a significant way, to the point that I would say the series starts out really, really strong, but ends with me going, eh. That being said, how do you feel about Star Wars The Acolyte? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Or are you like me, where it was a mixed bag with some plot points that definitely raised some alarm bells? And remember, if you want to see videos like this a week early, please consider becoming a channel member or a patron for only $1.99 a month, where you get early access to videos like this, exclusive videos, and you get to vote in polls that determine the future content on this channel. If you feel extra generous, I do have a Cash App, PayPal, and Venmo. Financial support is very much appreciated. But if you can't support the channel financially, you can always do so by liking, subscribing, clicking the bell if you're on YouTube, and sharing the content so that others can enjoy. That being said, until the next video, help me, Darth Plagueis. You're my only hope.